I'd like to welcome David Glenn to the stage, CEO and founder of Factuel. David is the co-author of Testing Business Ideas with Alex Osterwalder. David pioneered GE Fast Work with Eric Rice, coached energy product teams at Adobe, and even helped Toyota apply lean startup practices. Before his transition into consulting, David spent over 10 years of his career at technology startups. He stays connected to the startup scene through his work at several Silicon Valley accelerators. So, hi, David.
Hello.
Really happy to have you on board today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great, thanks. So, I'll leave you to the stage right now. So you're going to share your screen. While you are sharing your screen, just a quick reminder on how to interact with Hermit. On the bottom of the screen, you have the emojis, so you can directly interact while we are talking. And on the right side of the screen, you have the chat box, the Q&As. Also, if you guys want to send some question. So I'll leave the stage at this point. I'll come back in around 35 minutes. And I'll be happy to moderate the Q&A at the end of the session. So here we are, David. Thank you for being here today, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully share some cool stuff with all of you this morning. So basically, my background is all over the place. So most of my background is it's split between startups and advising and coaching. So I spent the first almost 10 years of my career at startups and learned quite a bit there. And then, decided to give startups a break a little bit, at least from trying to scale them, and spent most of my time basically advising companies. And so based outside the Silicon Valley for quite some time, and really just trying to share a lot of what I've learned with you all today. So basically, this is going to be a little bit about my book called Testing Business Ideas. So I wrote this book with Alex Osterwalder, and I feel that it is a pretty actionable book on entrepreneurship and innovation, and I'll try to share some of my thinking behind it and everything with you all today. I do have sort of a learning objective, and so basically for this session, I want to help you de-risk your product and your business ideas so that you're not necessarily wasting your time building things that nobody wants. And then my code of conduct is really for every workshop I do, basically be excellent to one another. So it's like the Bill and Ted code of conduct. So basically, what I want you to do is just be respectful in tone if we do share out in our exercise together today. So I kind of want to start here with design thinking. And basically, I pull a lot of inspiration from design thinking. And I'm having a design degree myself. It's kind of how I got started in my career. And really, this idea of kind of like desirability. Do people want this? So this idea of what is there a job to be done behind what you're working on? Is there a pain you're trying to solve or a gain you're trying to create? Viability being, should we do this? Now, obviously, you should have a moral compass in ethics and business, but also should we do this from a financial perspective? So from cost versus revenue. And then feasibility, sort of should we do this? And then we go to can we do this, which is more around the it's technical feasibility, but it's also about more than technical. It's regulatory, it's governance, it's basically is there any reason we can't do this, and looking at risk from this perspective as well. So I learned this again mostly from IDEO and Stanford D School, and then it's also from Larry Keeley and Dublin Group and Institute of Design. So this is a very popular framing. You'll see it drawn this way quite often. And so basically, when you look at the people needed, to answer these questions, for desirability, quite often you're going to need somebody that can answer questions about, from research and also design You could also pull in other people, such as sales or marketing, but basically you're going to want to have people that can answer some of the do they want this type questions. And then from a viability point of view, you also want folks in the room, usually with some kind of product background, maybe even finance background, right? Depending on how your company or your teams are set up. But basically, you want somebody that can help answer those types of questions as well. And then back on the feasibility side, you want folks that can answer some of the technical questions and maybe even legal. They don't have to be part of your core team, but being able to reach out to them and really think through, okay, so basically, do we have a something we can do that's technically and overall feasible to do? And so, like any good Venn diagram, right? You're trying to address risk in all three. So you don't want to be in a situation where people want it, but you can't build it, or you can build it, but people don't want it, or you can build it and people want it, but there's no business model behind it and you can't generate enough work. So, generate enough revenue. So basically, this is how I approach a lot of risk. And so what we did in the book is basically, we kind of took this framing of risk and we said, okay, what if we layered this in on some of the existing tools we use? So my co-author Alex created this tool called the Business Model Canvas. It's all very, it's used in almost every entrepreneurship program or accelerator I go into. And, we've taken these themes and we say, look, what kind of desirability risk do you have? So think about your value proposition, your customer segments, your channels, your relationships. Viability risk, think through what kind of risk do you have around your revenue and your cost. And then feasibility risk, what's that kind of backstage risk that you have for being able to basically execute on the idea. And so quite often when I'm working with teams to fill this out, we go through, okay, so who are your customers? Like basically who are your customer segments? And then what is your value proposition to them? So for value proposition, it's quite often, it could be your product, but also the benefit of your product, the perceived benefit of using it. And then your channels. So think about acquisition, distribution channels. So basically, how do you acquire your customers? How do you reach them? And then your relationships, which are, a lot around, what, are they direct? Are they personal? Are they indirect? Are they automated? What is the nature of the relationship with your customers? And then how do you make money? How do you generate revenue, direct or indirect? So you'll notice I don't go left to right when I'm helping teams do this. It's quite often we're going through, hey, who's your customer? What's your value prop? Et cetera. And so a lot of that is often desirability risk. And then on the backstage, what are the key activities? So think verbs that you need to do to make this happen. What are the resources you need? So think nouns, physical and digital. What do these cost? So, you can get your costs from there. And then finally, like, who are your key partners? So you notice I don't really start with key partners quite often. That's not a really interesting place to start your story. It's more about your overall business model and your value prop. So if you think of it from almost like a flow, right? It's like, how do you deliver your value to your customers and reach them? What's the nature of the relationship you have with them? And then how do you generate revenue? So direct or indirect. And then on the backstage, you look at your activities and your resources, and you can say, okay, here are my costs. And then if you partner with somebody, it's important that you're partnering with them because they bring an activity that either you can't do, or a resource that maybe you don't have or can't acquire, or maybe they even create a channel for you that you can reach your customer through your partner. And so when you start looking at risk this way and you start looking at your business model more than just a checklist, it's more about the relationship between things. It's a really interesting way of working and looking at your strategy. And so much of strategy still is about storytelling and how we communicate. And once we tell a story through a tool like this, if there are problems with our story, there's a good chance that there's also a problem with your strategy. And so being able to use storytelling, I think, is very powerful. And basically, where we go from there is, we start writing down what assumptions we have around each of these themes. So I like using colors. So I use orange for desirability, I use green for viability, and I use blue for feasibility. And so what we do is we write down, like we start off with these statements like we believe. So like we believe that our value proposition is something our customers want. For example, we believe we can reach our customers. We believe we can generate enough revenue. These are very generic, but usually when I do the exercise, it's quite more precise with what people write down. And then what we end up doing is we end up start pulling these over and having a conversation about where do we focus. And so I have this little tool that I call assumptions mapping. And I first picked this up from working with Jeff Gothelf and Josh Seiden, who wrote Lean UX. I used to work with them at a previous company. Let me zoom down a little bit. So basically, it's a 2x2 where you're forced to prioritize what are the most important things, so important to your business that have to be true. And then do you have evidence or not to support the statements that you've written down? And so this is sort of our way to start getting to something that we can test. So typically what we do is we bring over, let's say, a sticky, and we say, how important is this, the statement we wrote down, versus unimportant? Now, quite often, teams will write down the most important stuff, but not everything's the most important. So it really forces you to almost prioritize. And then we say, okay, how much evidence do we have or not to support this statement? So think observable evidence, think qualitative and quantitative. And quite often, if they haven't talked to customers, these end up being up here, which are, we have these like assumptions around our customer and we haven't really talked to them. So a lot of these are really important. And if they're wrong, it kind of doesn't matter, what else we do. And so with the, other themes, we start bringing them over. And quite often what I'll do is I'll do something like, hey, is this more important or less important? Or do we have more evidence or less evidence? And so what tends to happen is once you do a few, as you talk and bring these over, it becomes really obvious, like where are the kind of things that if you ignore will break your company in sort of a big way, not a small way. And so I think it's a really interesting exercise. It's part of Google's design sprint kit. So Google uses this for their design sprint program now, design sprint program. And basically, the way I try to facilitate it is pretty much, ignore anything below the line. So anything down there is like, it's not worth your attention at the moment. And quite often, over here, if you have stuff that's important and you need to do it, just make sure you plan for it and you share it with your team. So it doesn't mean you ignore the stuff that's important where you have evidence. It just means that that's usually not where you're going to experiment. And so basically, when I talk about, where do we experiment, where I'm trying to help teams focus are these things that are really important, where you have no evidence to support them. And so if you're going to experiment, you might as well do it on things that de-risk your actual strategy. And so basically what we end up doing is, in the book, was a pretty ambitious effort. we basically said, look, for your risky assumptions, or leap of faith assumptions, as Eric Ries might call them, you should run experiments that match your risk. And so what we've done is we've created kind of this like field guide, a library for 44 different experiments that help you de-risk what you're worried about, the most important things where you have the least amount of evidence. And the way we've categorized them has been in discovery and in validation. And so basically, when you think about how to start, finding your way through some of this risk, the way we framed it is there are all these things you can do, and the internet is not lacking for a list of stuff, right? So all my teams, they can go online and find a list of stuff. The problem was they weren't able to choose what to work on out of the list. And so when you think about like strength of evidence, you're kind of going from at the beginning anyway, usually with a new idea, you're going from none to some. And so when you're looking through your all these different experiments you can run, anything from customer interviews to search trend analysis to a day in the life, there are plenty of things you could choose from. Basically, you're trying to go from like almost no evidence whatsoever to like, even are we on the right track at all? And so you're trying to essentially get people to a point where they it's like open-ended directional hypotheses. You're not going to have a sure bet or anything, but you'll be able to just sort of find your way and realize that, oh, okay, we actually are on the right track, and we have some real jobs, pains, and gains to solve with our customer. So it's a lot of desirability at the beginning usually. And then from validation experiments, this is where you're trying to go from some evidence to strong evidence. And so you want to have strong evidence, if you're an investor and you're trying to get, or you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to get investing, getting funding, and you're talking to an investor, you want to be able to prove that you have traction in some meaningful way. If you're at a bigger company and you're trying to convince, you're not trying to convince a VC, but you're trying to convince a VP, then also having evidence is really helpful. And so when I talk about things like, like minimum viable product, right? We use this term MVP. This is where a lot of that traditional kind of lean startup stuff you would find. So, for example, like a concierge is a type of MVP where you do it all manually instead of basically building any software. Wizard of Oz is another kind of MVP, which is you would do it all manually, but it's not obvious a person's involved. So you might do something that is a bit it's like man behind the curtain or woman behind the curtain kind of thing, like Wizard of Oz book and movie. And then we have a single feature MVP. So that's kind of like Amazon Dash buttons, I think, were interesting. A single feature where they would just, you would press the button on the little device and then it would order something from Amazon for you. And mashup, which is really interesting to see a lot of software being mashed up, existing services like Zapier and Airtable and Notion and all these things, and you just kind of wire them together and you end up having a functioning product. I met one of the co-founders of Tesla before the pandemic, and he was talking about how the initial Tesla car was kind of a mashup. It was a Lotus Elise chassis and a bunch of other existing components, put together to make an electric sports car. So, it was, now Teslas look very different now. Of course, they have a lot of their own design and everything. But if you look at the first early Tesla, the first mule that they called it, it was pretty much a mashup. So what we've done is we kind of like created a library for people to make progress instead of staying up late at night worried about your product or business, being able to sort of choose something that'll help you pay down your risk. So the point here is not to run experiments, but basically to address your risk, to pay your risk down. And I think that's a big point to make. So essentially, just to recap so far, using these themes, desirable, viable, and feasible, to look at risk, to look at kind of these big questions of, do they want this? Should we do this? Can we do this? Sketching out your strategy with something like a business model canvas, and then thinking about your risk on top of that. So what kind of risk do we have around desirability and viability and feasibility? And then writing your risk down. So writing these things down as assumptions, like beliefs that have to be true. And then coming over and mapping them and trying to figure out, okay, what are the most important ones where we have the least amount of evidence to support? And then choosing an experiment that helps address that kind of risk. So basically the way we categorize the experiments is that, each one has a specific well, each one has like a taxonomy applied to it. So, for example, if I start digging into like concierge, for example, so with a concierge, you have cost. It's not very expensive to do. So, you can do a concierge experiment. I mean, it's manually, right? So it's not like you have to buy a lot of things for it. It's just whatever you have to do the job manually. For time, it doesn't take a lot of time to set up. And it takes a little more time to run, but that really depends on the length of how long you do it. It doesn't scale, but that's okay. It's okay to do things that don't scale. And I think we forget that sometimes. We want to jump to scaling maybe a little too soon. And when we jump to scaling, well, if we scale something that nobody wants, that's how most startups fail. It's what I've seen. And that's how most products die, is because we tried to scale way, way too soon. And then the evidence strength, which I love about a concierge, is it's really strong. So it's strong because you're testing all three of these themes. So you're testing desirability, viability, feasibility, and you're behind the scenes. You're doing the work to find out what it takes to actually deliver the product. So I think that's just really interesting from this perspective of, okay, well, let's just do it manually and see how we actually create this value. And then we can take what we've learned and we can automate it, but we figure out firsthand, I feel like maybe a good story is like DoorDash. So DoorDash early on was started out here in Palo Alto, and the founders were kind of going to different small business owners and asking, what kind of questions, basically doing interviews for the small business owners. And they heard a manager like decline an order, and they started digging into that. Like, why did you decline the order? And they realized that small businesses couldn't support delivery because they couldn't staff for it. And this is kind of where the idea of DoorDash came about. But if you look at how they did it early on, they did it like a complete concierge. The founders were literally going and getting the food and driving and delivering it, and trying to figure out where to park, figuring out what happens when they forget things at the restaurant. How do you handle that situation? What happens when people try to pay? So they learned a lot of this stuff firsthand. It didn't scale. Like, they couldn't scale DoorDash with the co-founders driving around getting food for people. But I thought it was a really, really interesting idea of like, okay, when I start to scale this, what are some of the things to look out for? How do you park on a busy street, or you're delivering to an apartment complex? Or what happens when, people forget things at the restaurant? How do you operationalize that and solve for that? And so, at the end of the day, like, you're still delivering, right, a value to a customer who's paying for it. And so you can learn quite a bit from doing something manually, and then essentially learning from that and then taking it and operationalizing it. So I think it's just a really fascinating way. Every time I work with a team and we say, hey, what could we do manually to learn? I think it's just, I love tapping into the team's creativity and hearing them come up with ideas that they can use for testing and learning. So that's just one example, but you can start to see, if I zoom in here again, you can start to see with regards to the taxonomy we applied, we tried to do cost. So how much does an experiment cost generally? How strong or weak is the evidence? How long does it take to set up? How long does it take to run? What themes does it, does it do desirability or feasibility or viability, or all three? Some do all three, some only do one, some do two. And then we also have, these capabilities. These are more just of a guide. So for example, if you're trying to do something like a landing page, it helps to have design or access to design or templates, right? But we tried to call out, what kind of capabilities. It doesn't mean you have to have a role for each capability, but you just need to be able to access those capabilities, because sometimes if you're doing an experiment and you don't have the right people in the room, then it can be really hard to go execute it. So what I've done for you all today, for those of you that don't have the book, is I've created so this kind of cheat sheet with cards. So Tendai Vicky helped put these together. He's associate partner at Strategyzer, and he was kind enough to help create these with a designer. And basically, these are all the different experiments in the book. So we have the discovery experiments right here, and we have the validation experiments down here. And so basically what I thought would be fun would be to let you sort of join me here in the board and we could talk about how to do maybe a sequence of experiments. So the sequence is something that I've been pushing even before the book, which is quite often when you're working through anything that's really high uncertainty, you're going to have to run more than one experiment. I've never worked with a team where we had a brilliant idea, we ran an experiment, it was wildly successful, and then we just built the thing and made money. That's never happened. I'm not saying it can't happen, but it's never happened for me or any teams I work with. So I thought maybe what we could do is kind of walk through what could a sequence of experiments be. I'll use a fun example to start us off, and then maybe you all can share what you're working on as well. And so I don't know if do we still have the link in the chat? Maybe I can just drop it in. Let's see if I can drop this in for you all. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so when you click, and thank you for putting that in, you can click enter as visitor. You don't have to necessarily register to participate. It'll give you a lot of the functionality that we have together, so you can hang out with us. Okay, so let's go for something fun maybe to get us started before you all jump in. So let's do what is a good one? Let's do an AI. Let's do SMS based chatbot for men's dating advice. All right. So this was a thing that it was a real it was a real experiment from a team in New York that believed that men would want to have dating advice from a bot. Okay, so just leave it at that. This is what the idea was. And so basically what they did is they performed customer interviews, right? So they start interviewing men and they said, hey, look, where do you get your dating advice? Can you, are there any gaps in it? Are there things that are lacking? They also did some search trend analysis. So they did basically beyond the people they interviewed, they went online and they looked for, are lots of people searching for dating advice? Are lots of men doing that? Don't post anything inappropriate while I'm doing this, please. You can post pictures in here. Yeah, thanks. And then basically from search trend analysis, and then they did some paper prototyping. And they started sketching out what a chatbot could be. And then from there, they did a landing page of what basically the bot would do with a call to action. And then from there, they did a Wizard of Oz. So basically, they had a team of women go in and basically pretend to be a bot. So people would SMS the bot through the landing page, and then the women would respond as if they were a bot, but they weren't, because it's like, why create a bot if we don't know if people will even basically text the bot? And so I thought it was a really interesting experiment where we used, basically the team used what they learned from the customer interviews to go search for more traffic online to see if it's more people than just the people they've interviewed searching. They used that to kind of sketch out what the bot could do. They threw up a landing page really quickly with a call to action, and then they had a team of women basically respond to the bot. Now, where it went horribly awry was that they had 1,000 signups in the first few hours. So that overwhelmed the team of women doing the bot, pretending to be a bot, and then they couldn't even respond to the men who were literally so lonely they were texting a bot to get advice. So in hindsight, using a wait list would have helped probably stem some of that demand. So, but to give you an idea of what I meant by sequence, right? And this is a real scenario, as silly as it might sound. It failed because of viability. It failed because it was hard to figure out a business model for this. But overall, men had no problem texting a bot for advice, and we didn't have to build a bot to figure it out. So what I thought we could do is, if you all are up for it, go over here to the left and look at the experiments. So for example, there's some great details here. So like if you're saying, I don't know what a feature stub is. Well, if you zoom into feature stub, it has a little explanation. So it's a small upcoming test of an upcoming feature. So think of like when you click on something in Google and it's a link and it says we're not quite ready yet. That's pretty much them testing a feature stub, and they're testing how many people saw this, how many clicked on it, how many reached out to inquire about it, right? So it's a really small test that you can do. You don't do it for very long or on very many people or with very, very many people, but that gives you an idea of what kind of details we have for each of these. So what I thought I would do is I would set a timer. So let's do, so those of you that aren't joining in, just click the link if you want to participate. I'm going to set a timer up here for 5 minutes. I'm going to let you all look at these experiments here on the left. And then all you have to do to create a sticky is just double click and then you can type in it. So basically, if you're up for it, thinking through some problem that you're working on and something that maybe an idea you're working on, and then coming up with some experiments you think that might help you with the idea. And if you're willing to share out, we can do that as well before we do Q&A. All right. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes. I'll play some music and we'll see what kind of experiment sequences you all come up with. All right. So 5 minutes and go. We have 2 minutes left. right. So we might need some help with facilitation here. I don't know who is who and who created some awesome sequences. So maybe we can have somebody raise their hand and then we can unmute you or ask you to share. I'll need some help from the organizers on this part. So does anybody want to share out what they came up with the larger group? I don't know how you raise hands here, so we could also jump into Q&A too, but I just want to give people a chance if they wanted to share out with the rest.
I drew one experiment if there's nobody that is willing to share it with one of our customers that we had in the past.
Oh, please, yes. Yeah, go ahead.
It's the one called compost bin cleaning, which is about right in the middle with this one. So we had one customer in the past that wanted to build a machine for compost bin cleanup because their hypothesis was that people were not using it because it smelled bad, basically, and they wanted help like cities to deploy the compost bin and also the adoption rate of those compost bins. So what they did was they kind of walk in through some neighbors and they kind of interview people and directly ask them if they were willing to clean up their compost bin for like $15 or $20 or something. So they were kind of doing customers interview while also Wizard of Ozzing the thing, because at some point they wanted to build, a truck, like an automatic truck that would maybe run right behind the city truck that was taking the compost bin. So that's what they did first. And then it worked. So people were willing to pay. So they had they made like $400 a day or something like that. Just walking into the neighborhood with buckets and cleaning stuff. And then what they did after was they hired Salesforce to go like walking door to door and just knocking on people's door to ask them to clean it. And it worked again. And then what they did, they built a brochure and they kind of pre-sell for the next summer to ask people if they were willing to opt in for like a season ticket, like that someone would be cleaning your bucket each 2 weeks or each month or each like twice in the season or something. So they kind of opt into a pre-sales mode to see what kind of retention rate that they could have with their customers.
Wow, thank you for sharing. That's awesome. So yeah, this is exactly kind of what I'm talking about. It's being able to navigate your way through the uncertainty, through this messiness of, having a new idea, and how do you kind of experiment your way through it? It's a very iterative process. I know this looks kind of linear, how we put the stickies, but it's pretty much an iterative process, and being able to just kind of find your way through it based on evidence. So using what you learn from one experiment to inform another, I think is kind of like your superpower. If nothing else, if you come away from this with, I learned how to match experiments and take what I've learned from one and put into another, then I'll be really thrilled. So really quickly before we do the Q&A, if you go over here to the right, there's all kinds of free stuff for you all. So basically on my site, I have articles and templates and videos and things on how to do assumptions mapping. The way this works is you just double click it and it'll open up a tab. And so here's all a bunch of free resources for you all. I have a type form, PDFs, whatever that you can use to help. By all means, go download all the things. So with that, I will stop sharing, and then we can move into Q&A. And basically, whatever questions you all have for me, happy to jump in and try to share what I can.
Thanks a lot, David. It was very interesting, by the way. So yeah, we do have a couple of questions. First question that I see was from Emily, which is going that way. So as far as you know, is there any virtual tool that can gather all of the information from the experiments or learnings in order to centralize the information and maybe have a kind of a quick overview of the status of your project? Is there any tool that you could recommend or that you are aware of?
Yeah, I mean, there are some obviously, having written a book with Strategyzer, we use the Strategyzer app quite a bit because it connects the canvases to the hypotheses, and then you can track your experiments. And so there's a lot of like object layer sort of stuff built in behind the scenes to connect things. Otherwise, you could use, if you can't, necessarily use Strategyzer, there are other kind of workflow management tools you can use. They're really more generic, like Trello or Mural, just for like what I'm using here. But I don't know if you need some of the backstage, infrastructure to sort of determine viability and all that stuff. We're still learning on how to take all that stuff out of people's heads and put it into a product. But yeah, I would point you to the Strategyzer app. For the most part, start there and see if that helps you organize your experiments.
Great. So I guess we can have the link for the Strategyzer app on the Strategyzer website.
Yeah, it's just strategyzer.com, but I'll put it in the chat.
Excellent. Second question from Christophe. He's asking, the testing business ideas Mural is kind of useful when we need to work as a group. So is there any way we can have it available for if we buy the book, or is there a way we could have kind of a copy of or pay for it at some point?
I haven't explored that yet. I just partner with Mural. I use it for all my remote workshops. So almost all my workshops before the pandemic were in person. Mm-hmm. And I had some virtual work for distributed teams, but the majority of people would want me to show up in person. That all stopped with the pandemic. And so I've been using Mural heavily for the last year to do a lot of my facilitated workshops. So I don't necessarily license out my templates. This one I'll leave up for you all. Just like don't share it online on the internet to millions of people, because anybody can come in and edit it, right? But yeah, I mean, it's not that hard once you understand the concepts of the book to kind of create your own. So if you look at this one, all I did was basically lay things out. And Mural has a lot of great tutorials and templates to help you with onboarding and help you figure out how to lay out your own. Because why this is great for like a 1 hour session, I use very different Murals for my in-depth workshops, which usually go for 3 to 4 hours at a time. Yeah, nothing yet, but I would just say take inspiration from this one, and then try to make something for your own. I think it's just it's really powerful tool to use to get to people from a distributed point of view. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And meanwhile, if you guys want to buy the book, we add the link on the participant guide and also on our website. And there are a couple of testing sequences in there that I found very useful for B2B hardware, B2B software, or something. So that's something that without the Mural or without having David, you could have kind of a work frame to work in team, depending on the kind of product that you guys have. Great.
Yeah. Just to clarify, real quickly, I do have a template in Mural for assumptions mapping. So you can use that as a template to start off with, and it has all the questions and it has the 2x2. So it's not this exact board, but there is a template for assumptions mapping in Mural that you can use for free.
Great. Thanks. Excellent. Another question from Elizabeth. What about running tests when you are doing a startup in a very competitive field?
Yeah.
Sure, go ahead.
I mean, I think usually what people are worried about there are other people's copying your ideas or stealing them, or you can't stand out. And so I have seen examples where it works. I mean, I work in travel industry quite a bit, or used to. And if you look at a company like Hotel Tonight, travel was really, really crowded space. And they were able to still come up with a very specific use case that was very successful for them, which was, I need a hotel tonight. Like, usually probably for consultants like me, it was probably their target, right? Where you land, you forgot to book your hotel, and you're at an airport in a city, and you're like, oh no, I need a hotel tonight. And it searches for a specific radius and just sees what's available for tonight. So I would challenge you to think, even if it's a competitive space, what is that specific, unique thing you're doing to stand out? And it doesn't have to be everything, right? It could be like Hotel Tonight's a great example, because it's like, I literally want a hotel tonight, and that was their use case. And they gave this amazing talk at South by Southwest on how they used Lean Startup to test that out. And so it's doable. I would say don't try to compete with other people by just throwing money at paid acquisition. and ads, try to find a different way to stand out, either through content or through just really specific segmentation. But yeah, it's totally doable though.
Great. I had a question also, because we are running experiments with our customers, and we often have this question. So how could one tell he has strong evidence? And if so, like, is it for each individual or organization to set up their metrics before conducting an experiment?
Yeah, I didn't deep dive into test card and learning card and everything today with you all, but what we do is from that top right, we kind of turn that assumption into like a working assumption, which is basically a hypothesis, and we make sure it's testable and precise and discrete. And then from there, we fill out a test card, which is basically saying, okay, so what am I going to do? What are the metrics I'm going to measure? And then what are my acceptance criteria? And so it does take a little bit of work to reason through. All right, like if you had a landing page with a call to action, there are industry-specific conversion rates you can research and find out. Oh, I'm in real estate. What's a typical conversion rate for a landing page in real estate? And then if I launch a page with a unique call to action, right, or a unique value prop and a call to action, what range should I look for? You know, I would say in general you're going between 10 to 15%. But it does vary by industry. So you kind of have to do that research. If you're running Facebook ads for a consumer product, what's an average click-through rate? You know, you're going to have to do a little bit of research to find out what that is so you can baseline against it. But overall, the way I try to frame it is be thinking through, if I was to get more funding, you know, how would I convey I have a strong signal, right? Because if you say, I talked to 50 people and one person wanted it, that's probably not great, you know, even for B2B. So, you know, you want to draw a line in the sand. It doesn't mean you give up if you don't hit it, but you do have to, you know, put some sort of rigor to it and some discipline to say, you know, unless I hit this number, I don't feel really strongly about the direction. And then also the way we try to do it in the book was, you know, you're going from some to strong overall. And usually that validation selection of experiments, those are stronger, right? Because if you have an MVP and you're selling and, you know, you're basically selling something and people are paying for it and giving you feedback on it, that's pretty strong evidence versus I did 5 customer interviews and people said they would buy it. That's pretty weak. I mean, it's just what their opinion of a hypothetical future, and you don't know if they really do it. And so that's where I think we get mixed up, is we take what people say and we get really excited about it, and then we come back to them and then they don't buy and our hopes are crushed. So you really want to iterate to just something that's stronger, where it's like real evidence versus like, you know, something that's just what people say.
So beginning, you might not have some like hard metrics, but the more you move forward towards like a business model or validation, you kind of have some more hard metrics that you could up and maybe comparing to industry, as you said.
Right. So it doesn't mean you don't have any metrics in the beginning, but just keep in mind they're open-ended, directional. You're just trying to figure out a direction. Later on, that's when it really, you know, when you're doing A/B testing and you have an MVP, that's when the metrics, the quantitative, I think, really kick in.
Great. So we have time for 2 last questions. So we often see that customer interview seems to be a good start. So why is it so much of a good start to have those conducting those customers interview at first?
Well, so much of it's qualitative, trying to understand customers' jobs, pains, and gains, what they're worried about or what they're looking for. And then it's a gold mine of information because you can use the quotes from your customers in future experiments. So when they explain your product back to you, that's what you put in your landing page. That's what you put in your marketing copy. That's what you put in your brochure. Because quite often we feel like we fall into this trap where it's just like, if we add a new feature, then they'll buy it. But really, quite often, they just don't know what you're talking about. They don't understand the words you're using. So being able to use voice of the customer, I think, is important. And so doing customer interviews, getting those great notes, and then taking those, like literally what you've written down and using it in your product, it works really, really well. So I think being able to talk to customers, it really doesn't stop. You know, most teams I work with, they spend, I don't know, at least a couple hours every week talking to customers still. So it doesn't mean you just you have a phase where you talk to customers and you just go build. It's usually something you want to continue to do even after you have an MVP or you have a product.
Yeah, and you know what? We did it for our business last summer, and we've been running the business for 3.5 years now. And we kind of dig down with all our customer, our back customer, to see exactly what they were thinking of us and exactly what they were expecting from us. And it's, as you said, it's a gold mine of information.
Agreed.
Good. Thanks. And maybe one last question, again, coming from me. We often tell people that desirability should be tested first. So, I mean, that's kind of what you said during your presentation. Well, that's what I understood. So in some case, could feasibility or viability be tested first? Like, do you have any example that they should be tested first in some cases?
It could be. Most of the time it's desirability, because if you miss on the value prop in the customer, it's really, really tough to succeed. But, you know, if you have feasibility risk with like regulatory or governance or policy, you know, the first startup I joined, we were transferring money online. And if we hadn't been able to clear the money through the regulatory bodies, it didn't matter that our platform worked. We never would have succeeded. And so we had a lot of feasibility risks we worked through. Viability, it's hard to test in isolation, but a lot of times if your costs are really high, then that's going to make you charge more, and then that might shrink your market. So they're very related. But yeah, when I work with R&D groups, or I work with people that have some really interesting tech, sometimes we start on the feasibility side, or some of the startups I work with, they're literally trying to do something in space, and space has a lot of feasibility risk. You know, if you're trying to build roads on the moon or something, or 3D print on a space station, there's a lot of feasibility risk there. So it does happen. There's no right or wrong, but I would say the majority of the time it's usually desirability, just because if you get that wrong, you know, you end up with technology that you're just seeking to solve a problem with. And if you find a problem before you run out of money, great. But sometimes people don't, and then they have a cool tech that never really became something like a business. So, yeah, it happens sometimes. I'd say most of the time it starts with desirability.
Yeah, exactly. And people that are looking to fit a product into the market without a problem solution fit or product market fit, it's kind of right fitting like a cube into a triangle, or trying to push something that people does not want to have. Great. Well, thanks a lot, David. That was really interesting. I've got a lot of great comments by direct message while we were talking and while you were doing your presentation. So really happy for us to have you joined in. Thank you. And well, I wish you a good day. I'm just going to switch in French for the end of the session. So again, thanks a lot for being here.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Donc, merci à tout le monde. J'espère que vous avez vraiment apprécié ça. C'était super intéressant.